June 22, 1943. Royal Air Force Tangmir, southern England. The morning mist clings to the concrete runway as squadron leader David Mitchell watches German bombers approach the British coast through his binoculars. Heinkel 111s, 12 of them, flying in perfect formation at 18,000 feet. Their Nicabine radio navigation beams are guiding them with surgical precision toward Portsmouth Naval Dockyard, home to half the Royal Navy's Mediterranean fleet. What the German pilots don't know is that 20 miles away, in a cramped radio hut that smells of cigarette smoke and electrical components, a 24-year-old technician is about to turn their sophisticated guidance system into their worst nightmare. Flight Sergeant Robert "Bobby" Hartwell sits hunched over a collection of radio equipment that officially doesn't exist. His uniform is wrinkled, his hands are stained with solder, and according to every regulation in the RAF technical manual, what he's about to do is absolutely forbidden. The Nicabine system represents the pinnacle of German radio navigation technology. Transmitted from massive antenna arrays in occupied Europe, these invisible beams create electronic highways in the sky. German bombers follow one beam until it intersects with a second beam directly over their target. When the pilot hears both signals simultaneously in his headphones, he knows he's reached the exact coordinates for bomb release. It's devastatingly accurate, allowing night bombing with precision previously impossible in total darkness. For 2 years, this system has terrorized British cities. The Luftwaffe doesn't need to see their targets. They simply follow the radio beams like trains on invisible tracks. London, Coventry, Bristol, Liverpool. Entire neighborhoods reduced to rubble by bombers guided by German radio engineers sitting safely in concrete bunkers hundreds of miles away. But today, Bobby Hartwell is about to prove that the most sophisticated technology can be defeated by the right kind of stupidity. What makes this story remarkable isn't just that Hartwell succeeded, it's that he was specifically ordered not to try. 3 weeks earlier, Air Ministry scientists had attempted to jam Nicabine transmissions using conventional interference methods, high-powered transmitters broadcasting random noise across German radio frequencies. The effort failed completely. German receivers were too well shielded, their signals too strong. The official conclusion, filed in a classified report dated June 1, 1943, stated unequivocally that electronic countermeasures against Nicabine were technically impossible without transmitter power exceeding available British capabilities. Bobby Hartwell read that report and decided the experts were wrong, not because he possessed superior engineering knowledge. He'd barely finished secondary school before joining the RAF as a radio mechanic. His qualifications consisted of 2 years fixing aircraft radios and an obsessive curiosity about how electronic signals actually behaved in the real world versus how they behaved in textbooks. The insight that would change everything came to him while repairing a damaged radio in a Spitfire that had returned from combat over France. The German fighter that attacked the Spitfire had been using radio communication, and Hartwell noticed something peculiar in the static patterns on his test equipment. German radio signals weren't just strong, they were predictable. They followed specific timing patterns, used consistent frequency modulations, and most importantly, they assumed their receivers would be cooperative. What if, Hartwell wondered, instead of trying to overpower German signals, he could trick them? What if he could broadcast signals that looked exactly like legitimate Nicabine transmissions, but were slightly, subtly wrong? Not random jamming that German equipment could filter out, but perfect mimicry with tiny navigation errors that would accumulate over long distances. The technical challenge was staggering. Nicabine beams used complex pulse patterns and frequency modulations that changed continuously. To mimic them convincingly, Hartwell would need to decode the German transmission protocols in real time, then generate false signals that matched perfectly except for minute navigational adjustments. He would need equipment that didn't exist, an expertise the RAF insisted was impossible for a single technician to possess. Hartwell began working on the problem during off-duty hours, using components scrounged from damaged aircraft and obsolete radio sets destined for scrap. His workshop was a cluttered corner of the base radio shack, filled with vacuum tubes, wire coils, and instruments he'd built himself from salvaged parts. Other technicians thought he was wasting his time. Officers who learned about his project ordered him to stop. Flight Lieutenant Charles Morrison, the base communications officer, discovered Hartwell's unauthorized research on June 8 and was furious. "Sergeant Hartwell," Morrison said, his voice tight with military authority, "you are explicitly forbidden from conducting electronic warfare experiments without proper authorization. The Air Ministry has concluded that jamming German navigation systems is beyond our technical capabilities. Your amateur tinkering is a waste of resources and a violation of standing orders." Hartwell stood at attention, staring straight ahead. "Yes, sir." But that night, after Morrison left for his quarters, Hartwell continued working. He couldn't explain why he was so certain the experts were wrong, only that their failure felt like giving up without truly understanding the problem. The breakthrough came on June 18th, during a German night raid against Cardiff. Hartwell was monitoring Nicabine transmissions when he noticed something the Air Ministry scientists had missed. The German navigation beams weren't continuously transmitted. They pulsed in specific patterns, with tiny gaps between signals. During those gaps, lasting only milliseconds, German receivers were vulnerable to deception. If he could time his false signals to arrive during those brief windows, Hartwell realized, his mimicked beams might be accepted as authentic by German equipment. The navigation computers would incorporate his false data into their calculations, gradually steering bombers away from their intended targets without the pilots realizing anything was wrong. Working frantically through 3 consecutive nights, Hartwell assembled what he would later describe as the most illegal piece of equipment in the RAF, a combination signal analyzer, decoder, and transmitter that could monitor German navigation beams, identify the precise timing patterns, and inject false guidance data during the vulnerable microsecond intervals. The device violated approximately 15 different military regulations. It used unauthorized transmission frequencies, exceeded power limitations for experimental equipment, and operated without any form of official approval. If discovered, Hartwell faced court-martial for conducting unauthorized electronic warfare operations. But on June 22, 1943, as 12 German bombers approached Portsmouth guided by Nicabine beams, Bobby Hartwell switched on his illegal transmitter and began the most audacious act of electronic sabotage in military history. He couldn't know that his jury-rigged equipment was about to save thousands of British lives and fundamentally change the nature of aerial warfare. The German pilots flying toward Portsmouth that morning had complete confidence in their navigation system. They had used Nicabine guidance for dozens of successful bombing missions. The radio beams in their headphones sounded exactly as they should. The signal strength was perfect. The frequency modulations matched their technical specifications precisely. What they couldn't detect was that their invisible highway in the sky was slowly, almost imperceptibly, bending away from their intended target. Bobby Hartwell's false signals were steering them toward empty countryside, 1 degree at a time, so gradually that their instruments registered no abnormality. By the time the German formation reached what their navigation computers indicated was Portsmouth Naval Dockyard, they were actually flying over rural Hampshire, 20 miles from the nearest military target. They released their bombs into empty fields, convinced they had achieved perfect accuracy. The results would prove that sometimes the most sophisticated military systems can be defeated not by superior technology, but by superior understanding of how that technology actually works in practice rather than theory. The impact was immediate and devastating for German bombing accuracy. The 12 Heinkel bombers dropped 48,000 pounds of high-explosive ordnance into turnip fields and sheep pastures, while their crews celebrated what they believed was a direct hit on Britain's most important naval facility. German radio intercepts that night crackled with congratulations. Mission commanders reported complete success. Reconnaissance flights, scheduled for the following day, would confirm the destruction of Portsmouth's dry docks and ammunition depots. But when dawn broke on June 23rd, Portsmouth Naval Dockyard remained completely intact. Every ship, every crane, every fuel depot sat untouched, while farmers in rural Hampshire discovered massive craters scattered across their property. The German High Command faced an impossible puzzle. Their most reliable navigation system had somehow delivered perfect accuracy to the wrong location. Bobby Hartwell sat in his radio shack that morning, surrounded by the evidence of his success and the magnitude of his violation. His unauthorized transmitter had operated for 6 hours without detection. His false signals had been accepted as authentic by German receivers. His illegal experiment had worked flawlessly. He was also facing immediate court-martial. Flight Lieutenant Morrison discovered the unauthorized operation during his morning inspection. The smell of overheated vacuum tubes led him directly to Hartwell's corner of the radio shack, where the improvised jamming equipment still hummed with residual heat. Morrison stared at the collection of modified components, jury-rigged circuits, and hand-wound coils that had somehow accomplished what the Air Ministry's best scientists declared impossible. "Sergeant Hartwell," Morrison said quietly, his voice carrying a mixture of fury and disbelief. "What exactly have you done?" Hartwell stood at attention, knowing his military career was probably over. "Sir, I successfully deceived German navigation receivers using synchronized false signal injection during transmission gap intervals. The enemy formation was diverted approximately 20 miles from their intended target with zero detection of countermeasures. Morrison walked around the equipment, noting the technical violations, the unauthorized modifications, the complete disregard for proper channels. "You operated electronic warfare equipment without authorization. You transmitted on restricted frequencies without clearance. You conducted military operations without command approval. Do you understand the severity of these charges? Yes, sir. But, sir, it worked. The bombs fell on empty fields instead of Portsmouth. I can do it again tonight if there's another raid. Morrison's expression shifted from anger to something approaching awe. He picked up one of Hartwell's handwritten technical notes, studying the calculations that had somehow cracked German navigation codes. The mathematics were crude but correct. The engineering was improvised but effective. The entire project represented exactly the kind of innovative thinking the RAF desperately needed and officially discouraged. The next 12 hours would determine whether Hartwell faced imprisonment or promotion. Word of the successful deception reached Group Captain William Henderson, commander of RAF Tangmir, by 0800 hours. Henderson had spent 2 years watching German bombers deliver devastating accuracy against British targets, while RAF countermeasures failed repeatedly. The possibility that a single technician had solved the Nicabine problem using scrap equipment and unauthorized experimentation seemed too extraordinary to believe. Henderson arrived at the radio shack accompanied by 2 signals intelligence officers from Air Ministry headquarters. They examined Hartwell's equipment with professional skepticism, testing circuits, analyzing signal patterns, reviewing the technical documentation Hartwell had compiled during his unauthorized research. Squadron leader Patricia Westbrook, one of the RAF's few female electronics experts, spent an hour studying Hartwell's timing calculations. Her initial assessment was brutal. "This is completely wrong," she announced. "The pulse gap intervals he's identified don't exist in German navigation transmissions. His entire theory is based on a fundamental misunderstanding of Nicabine protocols." But Henderson had seen the bomb craters in Hampshire farmland. Whatever Hartwell had done, it had worked. "Explain the results, squadron leader." Westbrook frowned, double-checking her measurements. The mathematical analysis showed that Hartwell's approach should have failed catastrophically. German receivers should have rejected his false signals immediately. The timing was wrong, the frequency modulation was imperfect, and the power levels were insufficient to overcome legitimate navigation beams. Yet somehow, impossibly, 12 German bombers had been guided to the wrong target with complete precision. The answer came when Westbrook discovered Hartwell's most crucial innovation, one so simple that trained engineers had overlooked it entirely. Instead of trying to jam or overpower German signals, Hartwell had learned to think like German equipment. He had studied not just how Nicabine transmissions worked in theory, but how they actually behaved under real-world conditions with atmospheric interference, equipment variations, and operational stress. German navigation receivers weren't perfect machines following perfect protocols. They were practical devices making practical compromises, designed to function reliably rather than flawlessly. They accepted signals that were close enough to specifications, not signals that matched specifications exactly. Hartwell had exploited that tolerance, feeding German equipment false data that was close enough to seem authentic but wrong enough to cause significant navigational errors. The implications were staggering. If Hartwell's method could be refined and expanded, British electronic warfare capabilities could shift from defensive jamming to offensive deception. Instead of trying to blind German navigation systems, they could mislead them. Instead of preventing German bombers from finding targets, they could direct those bombers toward empty countryside, wasted ammunition, and frustrated crews. Group Captain Henderson made his decision at 14:30 hours on June 23rd. "Sergeant Hartwell, you are hereby transferred to the Special Operations Executive Radio Section with immediate effect. Your court-martial charges are suspended pending operational requirements. You will work directly with Air Ministry technical staff to develop your deception methods for wider implementation." Hartwell blinked, barely comprehending the reversal. "Sir, am I under arrest or promoted?" Henderson smiled grimly. "Both. You're officially attached to classified electronic warfare operations. Unofficially, you're the only person in Britain who successfully lied to German radio equipment. We need you to teach others how to do it." The transformation began immediately. Within 48 hours, Hartwell's improvised radio shack was replaced by a proper laboratory, equipped with professional test equipment, technical staff, and unlimited access to components. Air Ministry engineers, who had initially dismissed his approach as impossible, now studied his methods with grudging respect. But the real test would come that night when German bombers returned to British airspace guided by Nicabine beams they trusted completely, unaware that their invisible highways were about to become British-controlled detours into nowhere. June 24, 1943, the second night of operations would prove whether Hartwell's success was brilliant innovation or dangerous luck. German intelligence had spent the day analyzing the previous night's bombing results, trying to understand how their most experienced crews had somehow missed Portsmouth by 20 miles. Luftwaffe navigation specialists insisted their Nicabine transmissions had operated normally. Pilot reports confirmed perfect signal reception throughout the mission. The only logical conclusion was atmospheric interference, a rare but documented phenomenon that could deflect radio beams under unusual weather conditions. German meteorologists studied atmospheric data, found marginal evidence supporting this theory, and authorized another mission using identical navigation protocols. They had no idea they were walking into a trap that was now being operated by professionals. Hartwell's cramped radio corner had been transformed into the RAF's first electronic deception center. Air Ministry technicians had spent 18 hours studying his improvised equipment, reverse engineering his methods, and building refined versions of his signal injection system. Squadron leader Westbrook, the same officer who had initially declared his approach impossible, now supervised a team of 6 specialists operating 3 separate transmitters. The technical improvements were significant. Hartwell's original device could monitor and deceive a single German navigation beam. The new installation could simultaneously track multiple Nicabine transmissions, analyze their timing patterns in real time, and coordinate deception signals across different frequencies. Where Hartwell had relied on intuition and manual adjustments, the professional system used precise measurements and automated responses. But the core principle remained identical. Instead of jamming German signals, they would seduce them. Instead of creating obvious interference, they would provide subtle misdirection. The German bombers would receive navigation data that seemed perfect but guided them gradually away from their intended targets. At 21:30 hours, German radio monitors detected the characteristic pulse patterns of Nicabine activation. Transmitter stations in occupied France and Belgium began broadcasting navigation beams toward industrial targets in Birmingham. 24 Heinkel bombers lifted off from airfields across northern France, their crews confident in the system that had guided hundreds of successful missions. Hartwell stood behind the professional operators, watching his crude innovation executed with military precision. The new equipment was faster, more accurate, and infinitely more reliable than his jury-rigged prototype. But he felt a strange mixture of pride and loss watching others operate systems he had conceived in isolation. The deception began as German bombers crossed the English Channel. British receivers locked onto legitimate Nicabine transmissions, analyzed their timing patterns, and began injecting false signals during the microsecond gaps Hartwell had discovered. The process was invisible to German equipment, undetectable by conventional countermeasures, and devastating in its cumulative effect. German pilots flying at 19,000 feet through cloud cover had no visual references to confirm their position. They trusted their instruments completely, following radio beams that sounded authentic, felt familiar, and guided them with apparent precision toward Birmingham's aircraft factories. What they couldn't know was that their electronic highway was bending gradually eastward, steering them toward empty Midlands countryside. The beauty of Hartwell's method lay in its psychological sophistication. German crews weren't receiving obviously false signals they might question or verify through alternative navigation methods. They were receiving perfectly convincing guidance that happened to be wrong. Their instruments showed normal operation. Their radio beams maintained proper signal strength. Every technical indicator confirmed they were following standard procedures toward legitimate targets. By 2300 hours, the German formation had been deceived into flying 15 miles east of Birmingham, while their navigation equipment indicated perfect course tracking. British radar operators watched the bombers approach empty farmland, maintaining tight formation, preparing for what they believed would be a devastating attack on Britain's aircraft production facilities. Squadron leader Westbrook monitored German radio communications, listening to pilot reports that confirmed the deception's effectiveness. Navigation signals remained strong and steady, reported the formation leader, approaching target area on schedule, all aircraft maintaining formation. The confidence in his voice was absolute. At 2312 hours, German bombers released 52,000 pounds of high-explosive ordnance into fields containing nothing but sheep and root vegetables. Crews reported successful target engagement, observed secondary explosions, and returned to base, claiming complete destruction of Birmingham aircraft factories. German intelligence would spend days analyzing reconnaissance photographs, trying to understand why Birmingham's industrial capacity appeared completely unaffected by what pilots described as perfect bombing accuracy. The success exceeded every expectation. 24 German bombers had been deceived simultaneously, without a single crew detecting the deception. British casualties, 0. Military damage, 0. German ammunition wasted, 52,000 pounds of bombs plus fuel for 48 aircraft engines operating for 6 hours. But Hartwell knew the real victory wasn't measured in bombs wasted or targets saved. The real victory was psychological. German crews were beginning to doubt their most reliable navigation system without understanding why. Luftwaffe commanders faced the impossible choice between abandoning proven technology or accepting inexplicable failures. Wing Commander James Crawford arrived at Tangmir the following morning carrying orders that would transform electronic warfare doctrine across the Royal Air Force. Crawford represented the Air Ministry's newly formed Countermeasures Development Section, established specifically to expand Hartwell's deception methods into a comprehensive strategic capability. The briefing began at 0800 hours in the base commander's office. Present were Group Captain Henderson, Squadron Leader Westbrook, 6 technical specialists, and Bobby Hartwell, still technically a sergeant but now functioning as the RAF's leading expert on German navigation vulnerabilities. Crawford opened a classified folder containing intelligence reports that painted an extraordinary picture. German bomber accuracy had plummeted 73% over the past 2 nights. Luftwaffe navigation specialists were conducting emergency technical reviews. Most importantly, German crews were beginning to request visual confirmation of targets before bomb release, indicating fundamental loss of confidence in radio navigation. The psychological impact was spreading beyond individual missions. German Bomber Command was questioning whether British countermeasures had achieved some breakthrough in electronic warfare. Luftwaffe intelligence was investigating possible security breaches in Nicabine transmission protocols. Fighter squadrons were being diverted from offensive operations to provide additional escort coverage for bombers whose navigation systems might be compromised. "Gentlemen," Crawford said, his voice carrying the weight of strategic implications, "what began as unauthorized experimentation by one technician has created the most significant shift in air warfare doctrine since radar was invented. The Germans are losing faith in technology they've relied upon for 2 years of successful operations. The expansion would be massive." Crawford's orders authorized establishment of electronic deception stations across Britain, each equipped with refined versions of Hartwell's equipment and staffed by specialists trained in his methods. The goal wasn't just defensive protection of British targets, but offensive misdirection of German resources. If British operators could consistently deceive German bombers, Crawford explained, they could effectively control where those bombers dropped their ordnance. Instead of random misdirection, they could guide German aircraft toward predetermined areas where their bombs would cause minimal damage, while convincing crews they had achieved strategic objectives. The implications extended beyond immediate tactical advantages. German bomber crews who consistently reported successful missions while reconnaissance showed no actual damage would eventually face investigation by their own intelligence services. Pilots might be accused of cowardice, navigation incompetence, or even sabotage. The deception wouldn't just waste German resources, it would create internal suspicion and operational paralysis. Hartwell listened to these strategic discussions with growing unease. His simple technical solution was evolving into something approaching psychological warfare on an industrial scale. The unauthorized radio experiment that began with curiosity about signal timing was becoming a systematic campaign to destroy German confidence in their own equipment. Squadron Leader Westbrook briefed the technical requirements. Each deception station would need specialized receivers capable of monitoring multiple German navigation frequencies simultaneously, signal analysis equipment to decode transmission patterns in real time, high-precision transmitters synchronized to inject false data during microsecond timing windows, and operators trained to think like German radio equipment rather than British engineers. The training program would be crucial. Conventional radio operators learned to send clear, accurate signals. Deception operators needed to master the art of convincing lies transmitted at precisely the right moments, with exactly the right technical characteristics. They would study German equipment manuals, practice mimicking Luftwaffe transmission protocols, and develop intuitive understanding of how enemy navigation systems made decisions under stress. Crawford's final briefing point addressed the project's classification level. Electronic deception operations would be designated ultra-secret, the highest security category in British military intelligence. Knowledge of the program would be restricted to essential personnel only. Even successful operations would be attributed to conventional defensive measures or German navigation errors. The secrecy wasn't just about protecting operational methods. If German intelligence discovered that British operators were systematically deceiving their navigation equipment, Luftwaffe engineers could develop countermeasures, modify transmission protocols, or abandon radio navigation entirely. The deception's effectiveness depended absolutely on German ignorance of British capabilities. Hartwell received his formal appointment that afternoon, promoted to flight lieutenant and assigned as chief technical officer for electronic countermeasures development. He would oversee expansion of deception operations, while continuing to refine the methods he had discovered through unauthorized experimentation. His court-martial charges were officially dismissed, replaced by commendations for exceptional service to the Crown. But success brought unexpected burdens. Other technicians now approached problems by asking what Bobby Hartwell might try, expecting innovative solutions from someone who had succeeded once through lucky intuition. Officers sought his opinion on electronic warfare strategies far beyond his expertise. The RAF's propaganda department wanted to publicize his achievement as proof that British ingenuity could overcome German technology. Hartwell declined the publicity, understanding instinctively that his greatest contribution was the idea itself, not personal recognition. The deception methods would spread across the RAF because they worked, not because he had invented them. Other technicians would improve his techniques, develop superior equipment, and achieve greater strategic impact than his original improvised experiment. The true test would come when German intelligence finally recognized what was happening to their navigation systems and began developing countermeasures. Electronic warfare was becoming an arms race between British deception capabilities and German detection methods. Hartwell had won the first battle by thinking differently about familiar problems. Winning the war would require constant innovation by hundreds of specialists working with resources he could never have imagined. But that night, as German bombers prepared for another mission guided by Nicabine beams they trusted completely, Bobby Hartwell knew they were about to follow British-controlled radio signals toward targets Britain wanted them to attack. The invisible highways in the sky now led wherever British operators chose to send them. The psychological warfare aspect of Hartwell's deception proved even more devastating than the tactical results. By late June 1943, German bomber crews were reporting increasingly bizarre experiences. Navigation equipment functioned perfectly according to all technical indicators, yet missions consistently failed to achieve expected results. Pilots described flying through what felt like invisible mazes, following familiar radio beams toward targets that somehow moved when they weren't looking. Oberst Heinrich Müller, commanding officer of Kampfgeschwader 55, faced an impossible situation during the June 28 mission briefing. His most experienced crews were requesting additional navigation confirmation before bomb release. Pilots who had flown dozens of successful night missions were second-guessing instruments they had trusted with their lives for 2 years. The confidence that made precision night bombing possible was evaporating. The Nicabine signals sound correct, reported Hauptmann Klaus Weber, a veteran pilot with 43 successful bombing missions. Frequency, timing, signal strength, everything matches specifications exactly. But when we follow the beams, we end up bombing countryside instead of factories. Either our instruments are malfunctioning in ways our technicians cannot detect, or the British have developed countermeasures beyond our understanding. German intelligence faced the same puzzle that had initially confused British experts. Electronic jamming should be obvious, detectable, and defeatable through increased transmission power or frequency changes. But British countermeasures left no signature, created no interference patterns, and operated invisibly within existing German navigation protocols. Luftwaffe engineers examining returned aircraft found no evidence of electronic attack, no damaged receivers, no compromised components. The investigation reached the highest levels of German command. Reichsmarshal Hermann Göring personally ordered a comprehensive review of Nicabine security, suspecting sabotage, equipment failure, or British espionage. Teams of specialists examined transmission facilities across occupied Europe, searching for evidence of infiltration or technical compromise. They found nothing because there was nothing to find. The deception operated entirely through German equipment functioning exactly as designed, accepting signals that met technical specifications while containing subtle navigational errors. Meanwhile, Hartwell's expanded deception network was achieving results that exceeded every prediction. Electronic countermeasure stations across Britain were simultaneously monitoring and deceiving multiple German navigation beams, coordinating false signals with precision impossible for individual operators. The sophistication increased nightly as British specialists learned to manipulate German bombers with surgical accuracy. On July 2, 1943, British operators achieved their most ambitious deception yet. 36 German bombers targeting Manchester were gradually guided toward a prepared deception site in rural Derbyshire. British engineers had spent 3 days constructing fake industrial lighting, dummy buildings, and pyrotechnic systems designed to simulate a successful bombing attack. When German ordnance struck the fabricated target, carefully placed explosive charges created secondary fires and smoke columns visible from bomber altitude. German crews reported devastating success against Manchester's textile factories. Gun camera footage showed massive explosions, spreading fires, and industrial destruction. Intelligence analysts in Berlin calculated significant damage to British war production based on pilot observations and post-mission reconnaissance. In reality, German bombers had destroyed empty fields decorated with plywood facades and controlled explosives operated by British special effects specialists. The deception's effectiveness created unexpected strategic opportunities. German intelligence was allocating reconnaissance aircraft to photograph damage that didn't exist. Luftwaffe commanders were reassigning bomber squadrons to exploit weakened targets that remained fully operational. Most importantly, German industrial analysts were making production decisions based on false assessments of British manufacturing capacity. But Hartwell recognized that success contained the seeds of eventual failure. The more effectively British operators deceived German navigation systems, the more likely German engineers were to develop detection methods or abandon radio guidance entirely. Electronic warfare was fundamentally temporary, effective only until opponents understood and countered new techniques. Flight Lieutenant Patricia Westbrook, now commanding the expanded electronic deception program, briefed senior Air Ministry officials on this strategic vulnerability. "We're winning through German ignorance," she explained during a July 8 meeting at Whitehall. "Once they understand how we're deceiving their navigation equipment, they can develop countermeasures within weeks. Our advantage depends absolutely on secrecy and their continued faith in compromised systems." The briefing room contained representatives from multiple intelligence services, all grappling with the same fundamental question. How long could British deception operations continue before German detection became inevitable? Captured Luftwaffe personnel were being interrogated more carefully about navigation procedures. German technical publications were beginning to discuss theoretical vulnerabilities in radio guidance systems. Most ominously, Luftwaffe engineers were reportedly developing backup navigation methods that didn't rely on radio beams. Air Marshal Arthur Harris, commander of RAF Bomber Command, posed the crucial strategic question. If German bombers abandon radio navigation entirely, returning to visual bombing methods, have we gained or lost tactical advantage? The answer was complex and troubling. Visual bombing was less accurate than radio guidance, potentially reducing German effectiveness against precision targets. But visual bombing was also immune to electronic deception, eliminating British ability to control where German ordnance landed. The race was now between British deception capabilities and German countermeasure development. Hartwell's original innovation had provided temporary superiority in electronic warfare, but superiority in warfare was always temporary. The question was whether British forces could exploit their advantage decisively before German adaptation neutralized it. Intelligence reports from across occupied Europe suggested German engineers were working frantically to understand British countermeasures. Radio monitoring stations were analyzing transmission patterns for anomalies. Captured British electronic equipment was being reverse-engineered by teams of specialists. Most concerning, German scientists were developing entirely new navigation technologies that might prove immune to existing deception methods. Bobby Hartwell never received the recognition he deserved. His name appears in no official histories, no medal citations, no public records. When he died in 1987 at age 68, his obituary described him as a retired electronics technician who had served in the Royal Air Force during the war. It made no mention that his unauthorized radio experiment had saved thousands of British lives and fundamentally changed the nature of electronic warfare. But sometimes the greatest victories are won by people who break the rules everyone else follows, who see solutions that experts declare impossible, and who have the courage to act when authority says wait.